Ladies and gentlemen, there comes a moment in life when the loudest battles we face aren't fought in the world around us, but in the quiet chambers of our own minds. Some of us walk into rooms already exhausted, not because of what we've done, but because of what we've been thinking. Overthinking becomes a weight that never sleeps, a storm that never stops swirling, whisper that grows into a shout telling us we are not enough, not ready, not worthy. And yet, deep within us, God has planted a peace that surpasses all understanding, a peace waiting to break through the chaos we've accepted as normal. Tonight, I want to speak to the part of you that is tired of wrestling with invisible battles, the part that smiles on the outside, but silently fights hurricanes on the inside, the part that knows you were created for clarity, purpose, and freedom, but keeps getting trapped in cycles of doubt, fear, and hesitation. Overthinking is not just a habit, it is a silent thief. It steals our joy, our focus, our energy, and our expectation for what God can do in our lives. But hear me clearly. You were never designed to live imprisoned by your thoughts. You were designed to walk in the confidence of God's promises, to move with the boldness of someone who knows heaven is backing them, to step into every season with courage, not confusion. When God speaks peace, no storm internal or external has the authority to drown it out. Some of you are one surrendered thought away from breakthroughs you've been praying for, one moment of clarity away from stepping into the assignment God handcrafted for you, one decision away from trading the noise of fear for the sound of faith. Tonight is not about learning to think less. It's about learning to trust more. It's about releasing the weight you were never meant to carry and embracing the freedom that has always been yours. Let this be the moment you stop battling your mind and start renewing it. Let this be the moment you silence the doubts, amplify the voice of purpose within you. Overthinking steals clarity, confidence, and spiritual peace by creating an atmosphere in the mind where doubt grows louder than truth and fear speaks louder than faith. It begins subtly in extra thought here, a moment of hesitation there, until the mind becomes a battlefield where every decision is questioned, every possibility is analyzed, and every outcome is feared before it even arrives. When the mind becomes consumed with endless loops of what if, should I, what could go wrong, or what will they think, it loses the ability to hear the gentle whisper of divine direction. Clarity is not simply the ability to think. It is the ability to discern, to recognize what matters, to see the path God is laying before you without the fog of unnecessary mental noise. But overthinking blurs that vision, pulling your attention away from what is essential and burying you beneath layers of unnecessary concerns. Clarity is a gift that comes from stillness, from trust, from aligning your thoughts with the promises of God rather than the predictions of fear. But when overthinking takes root, that gift becomes harder to reach. The mind becomes cluttered with possibilities that may never happen, scenarios that have no foundation in reality, and fears that grow larger only because they echo within the walls of an anxious mind. Instead of focusing on what God is leading you toward, you become fixated on everything that could go wrong along the way. Overthinking does not add wisdom, it subtracts focus. It does not protect you, it paralyzes you. It pushes you into a cycle where every step must be examined from every angle until action feels dangerous and stillness feels safer, even though stagnation is the very thing suffocating your purpose. Clarity evaporates when the mind is overwhelmed, and without clarity, decision-making becomes another burden instead of a path to progress. Confidence, too, slowly erodes under the weight of overthinking. Confidence is built on trust in God, trust in the gifts He placed within you, trust in the path He is guiding you through. But overthinking replaces trust with second-guessing. It magnifies weaknesses, it rehearses failures, it exaggerates risks, and it minimizes strengths. The more a person overthinks, the more their confidence becomes tied to their fears rather than their faith. Instead of stepping into opportunities with boldness, they shrink back, replay imaginary mistakes, and evaluating themselves through the lens of insecurity. Overthinking convinces the mind that caution is wisdom, even when that caution is rooted in fear. It tells you to prepare endlessly, to wait for the perfect moment, to gather more information, to think it through one more time, even when God is nudging you to step forward now. Confidence is not found by thinking more. It is found by trusting deeper. Yet, overthinking distracts the heart from that trust. It shifts your attention inward toward your own limitations rather than upward toward God's limitless strength. It tells you that unless you can control every variable, you are not ready. It whispers that you must have every detail figured out before you dare to move. And slowly, step by step, the confidence that should have been grounded in faith becomes buried beneath layers of doubt. Confidence weakens not because a person lacks ability, but because overthinking magnifies every insecurity until it becomes difficult to recognize the potential and power God has already placed inside you. Then there is the spiritual peace that overthinking steals so quietly, so gradually that many don't even realize it is being taken. Peace is not merely the absence of trouble. It is the presence of God's assurance within the heart. It is the calm that comes from knowing God is in control even when circumstances are not. It is the anchor that steadies the soul when storms arise. But overthinking disrupts that peace by shifting the focus from God's promises to one's own anxieties. Instead of resting in divine assurance, the mind becomes restless, trying to solve problems that heaven has already settled, trying to predict outcomes that only God can see, trying to carry burdens that were never meant to be carried alone. Spiritual peace thrives when the heart trusts God fully, but overthinking thrives in environments where trust is compromised. It feeds on uncertainty, on fear of the unknown, on pressure to perform, on the need to control outcomes. The more a person internally tries to manage life through relentless mental calculation, the further they drift from the peace God offers freely. Overthinking interrupts prayer, interrupts worship, interrupts moments of stillness, because it keeps the mind busy even when the spirit longs for rest. It creates noise where God offers calm, tension where God offers comfort, confusion where God offers guidance. The tragedy of overthinking is not only in what it creates, but also in what it destroys. Destroys moments that should have been enjoyed, replacing them with unnecessary worries. It destroys opportunities that should have been embraced, replacing them with hesitation. It destroys faith-filled decisions, replacing them with fear-based paralysis. It destroys the spiritual alignment that comes through resting in God, replacing it with mental exhaustion that drains both the heart and the spirit. When clarity is lost, direction becomes blurry. When confidence is weakened, action becomes delayed. When peace is stolen, the soul becomes overwhelmed. And in that state, overthinking gains more control, continuing the cycle of anxiety and uncertainty. Overthinking does not come from a place of wisdom or discernment. It comes from a place of fear and mistrust. It is the mind's attempt to protect itself without depending on God's guidance. It tries to secure outcomes through mental effort rather than spiritual surrender. But the more a person relies on their own thoughts for security, the more insecure they become. The more they seek answers from their own reasoning, the more confused they become. The more they analyze situations through their own perspectives, the more overwhelmed they become. Overthinking is not just a mental habit. It is a spiritual weight that grows heavier the longer it is carried. Clarity returns when the noise of unnecessary thoughts is quieted. Confidence returns when trust in God becomes greater than fear of failure. Peace returns when the heart releases the need to control everything and allows God to be God. Overthinking cannot coexist with true spiritual rest because one demands constant mental effort while the other requires surrender. Where overthinking creates pressure, peace creates ease. Where overthinking brings confusion, peace brings understanding. Where overthinking fuels fear, peace fuels faith. Overthinking steals clarity by blinding the mind with too many possibilities. It steals confidence by magnifying the wrong voices. It steals spiritual peace by distracting the heart from God's presence. And though it often feels like a quiet habit, its impact is loud. It affects decisions, emotions, relationships, work, spiritual life, and inner well-being. It affects how a person sees themselves and how they interpret the world around them. It affects whether they move forward or stay stuck. It affects whether they trust God or trust their fears. Overthinking does not simply distract the mind. It drains the soul. It does not simply slow progress. It stops it. It does not simply cause stress. It reshapes identity unless confronted and replaced with faith, trust, and alignment with God's truth. Freedom begins when we trust God more than our fears, because fear thrives in the absence of trust, and trust grows in the presence of faith. Fear focuses on what is uncertain, unpredictable, or seemingly impossible, while trust anchors itself in the unchanging character of God. When a person learns to lean into trust, real, surrendered, wholehearted trust, they begin to break chains that have quietly held their minds, emotions, and decisions captive for years. Fear tries to convince you that control is your safety, but trust teaches you that surrender is your strength. Fear tells you to brace for the worst, but trust opens your heart to expect God's best. The moment trust becomes greater than fear, freedom begins to take root, not because circumstances have changed, but because your posture toward those circumstances has shifted from anxiety to assurance. Fear creates limits in the mind long before any limit appears in reality. It whispers reasons why something cannot happen, why you are not enough, why the risk is too great, why the timing is wrong. It paints pictures of failure, embarrassment, loss, or disappointment, and it presents those images as though they are the only possible outcomes. But trust invites you into a different landscape, a landscape shaped not by the voice of fear, but by the promises of God. When you trust God, you begin to see possibilities where fear once showed impossibilities. You begin to recognize that the obstacles fear magnified were never as powerful as the God who walks with you. You begin to understand that you were never meant to navigate life through the lens of fear, because fear cannot comprehend the plans God has woven into your future. Trust is not passive. It is active, intentional, and deeply spiritual. It is choosing to place confidence in God's wisdom over your own understanding. It is choosing to believe that He sees the full picture while you only see a fragment. It is choosing to walk forward even when the path is unclear, because His presence is more trustworthy than your perception. Fear thrives in uncertainty, but trust thrives in surrender. And surrender is not weakness. It is the recognition that God is far more capable than we are of carrying the burdens we try to shoulder alone. When trust becomes the foundation of your decisions, fear loses its authority. When trust becomes the anchor of your heart, anxiety loses its grip. Freedom begins when trust takes precedence, because trust dismantles the illusions that fear uses to keep you small. Fear exaggerates the size of your challenges. Trust magnifies the greatness of your God. Fear makes you rely on your own strength. Trust invites you to draw from God's strength. Fear locks you in cycles of hesitation. Trust moves you into cycles of obedience. When you start trusting God more deeply, you stop giving fear permission to narrate your life. You stop giving fear the right to veto your calling, silence your voice, or shrink your vision. You stop allowing fear to define what you can or cannot become. Trust in God shifts your identity from someone who is intimidated by the future to someone who is empowered by divine purpose. Fear often disguises itself as logic, caution, or responsibility, but trust sees through the disguise. Fear wants to keep you predictable, safe, and contained, but trust opens doors to growth, transformation, and divine encounters. Trust does not deny the reality of challenges. It denies the authority of fear to control your response to them. When you choose trust, you are choosing courage over caution, faith over hesitation, and divine direction over human reasoning. Trust liberates the soul because it connects you to the one who holds all power. It reminds you that you do not have to figure everything out. You only have to follow the one who already has. Freedom emerges the moment the weight you carried alone becomes the weight you surrender into God's hands. Because the burdens fear produces anxiety, doubt, uncertainty, overthinking were never meant to be carried without Him. Trust exchanges the heaviness of self-reliance for the lightness of God dependence. Fear tries to convince you that you are alone, but trust reveals that God has been with you in every season, every valley, every unknown place, even when you did not feel him. Trust expands your capacity to receive divine strength because a trusting heart is an open heart, a heart ready for God to pour peace, clarity, and direction into every space that fear once occupied. Fear reduces life to survival, but trust reawakens purpose. When fear leads, life becomes a series of attempts to avoid pain, disappointment, or failure. But when trust leads, life becomes a journey of discovering what God can do through you. Fear makes you shrink your dreams so they fit your comfort zone, but trust enlarges your vision because it is grounded not in your ability, but in God's. Trust allows you to see beyond your limitations and into God's limitless power. It empowers you to take steps that fear told you were too risky, too impossible, too overwhelming. And every step taken in trust becomes an act of spiritual liberation. Loosening the chains fear used to hold your destiny hostage. Trust ignites spiritual freedom because it aligns your heart with God's heart. When you trust him, you no longer depend on external circumstances to determine your peace. Peace becomes internal because it is rooted in relationship, not conditions. Fear ties your peace to what you cannot control. Trust anchors your peace in the one who controls all things. Fear ties your worth to your performance. Trust anchors your worth in God's unconditional love. Fear ties your future to your past. Trust anchors your future in God's promises. Every time you choose trust over fear, you reclaim territory in your mind and spirit territory that fear once occupied. Fear often feeds on the unknown, but trust redefines the unknown as a place where God works most powerfully. When you trust him, uncertainty becomes less intimidating because you understand that God is already in the places you are afraid to step into. Trust transforms the unknown from a threat into an opportunity for God to reveal his faithfulness. Trust allows you to move forward even when you do not have all the answers because you are following the one who is the answer. Fear paralyzes you before the journey even begins, but trust empowers you to take each step knowing that God equips you along the way. Trust also frees the soul from the captivity of past experiences. Fear often arises from past wounds, past disappointments, past failures, and past betrayals. It tells you that what happened before will happen again. But trust invites healing by releasing the past into God's hands and believing that he can bring beauty from what once broke you. Trust transforms your past from something that haunts you into something that testifies of God's ability to restore and redeem. Freedom begins when trust becomes greater than the memories that fear uses to keep you bound. Trust shifts your focus from what hurt you to what God can heal in you. Fear also binds you by making you believe that your future is fragile, but trust reveals that your future is secure, not because circumstances are easy, but because God is sovereign. Trust reminds you that no weapon formed against you can prosper, that every step you take is ordered, that God has gone before you, that his plans are to give you hope, and that nothing can separate you from his love. Freedom begins when you no longer view the future through the lens of fear, but through the lens of God's promises. Trust allows you to dream again, hope again, believe again, and move again because you're secure. It is no longer rooted in what you can control, but in the one who holds time in his hands. Fear drains your spirit, but trust restores it. Fear isolates you, but trust reconnects you with God's strength, comfort, and presence. Fear silences your voice, but trust releases it. Fear keeps you stuck, but trust moves you forward. Fear blinds you to opportunities, but trust opens your eyes to God's provision. Fear keeps you living small, but trust expands your capacity to walk boldly. Fear leads you into patterns of self-protection, but trust leads you into patterns of divine purpose. Fear makes you doubt who you are, but trust reminds you whose you are. Freedom begins when the heart releases fear's grip and embraces trust as a way of life. Not selective trust, not occasional trust, not partial trust, but consistent, surrendered, unwavering trust. A trust that says, even if I don't see the whole picture, I will move because God is with me. Trust that says, even if I feel afraid, I will not obey fear, I will obey God. Trust that says, even if the situation seems impossible, I know the one who specializes in impossibilities. Trust that says, even when my emotions shake, my faith will stand. And it is in that posture of trust that freedom rises. It rises in the mind as peace replaces anxiety. It rises in the heart as courage replaces hesitation. It rises in the spirit as faith replaces fear. It rises in your decisions as purpose replaces confusion. It rises in your identity as confidence replaces insecurity. Freedom begins not in the absence of challenges, but in the presence of trust. Renewing the mind unlocks purpose, boldness, and breakthrough, because every transformation in life begins with a transformation in thought. A renewed mind is a mind that learns to release old patterns, old fears, old lies, and old limitations, and begins to embrace the truth of who God created you to be. So many people pray for change, yet hold on to mindsets that keep them tied to the very struggles they want to escape. They want new seasons but cling to old thinking. They want open doors but maintain a mindset built around closed ones. True renewal is not just about removing negative thoughts. It is about replacing them with God's truth, God's perspective, and God's promises so deeply that they reshape how you see, respond, and live. When the mind is renewed, purpose becomes clearer. Purpose is not discovered through constant searching. It is revealed through alignment. As the mind shifts from fear-driven thinking to faith-driven belief, the fog clears and the path becomes visible. Many people know they were created for something more, yet they remain unsure about what that more looks like because their minds are too crowded with doubt, insecurity, and internal noise. A renewed mind begins to silence the lies that say you are not capable, not worthy, or not chosen. It quiets the constant replay of past failures and awakens the truth that you were created intentionally, gifted uniquely, and called specifically. Purpose doesn't hide. It waits for the mind to be aligned enough to recognize it. With a renewed mind, you start seeing yourself the way God sees you. You begin to recognize your potential instead of your limitation. You begin to understand your identity is rooted not in your mistakes, but in God's grace. That shift unlocks purpose because purpose flows from identity. When you no longer see yourself through the lens of shame, fear, or comparison, you are free to step into the assignments designed for you. Renewing the mind opens the door to clarity, and clarity opens the door to direction. You stop wandering, stop second-guessing, stop hesitating, because you finally see the connection between who you are and why you're here. A renewed mind also ignites boldness. Boldness is not loudness. It is spiritual courage. It is the internal strength that rises in a person when they begin to think differently about what is possible. Fear loses its grip when the mind is renewed because fear depends on old patterns of thinking to survive. If your thoughts are shaped by past disappointments, fear thrives. If your thoughts are shaped by God's truth, fear weakens. Boldness does not come from perfect confidence in yourself. It comes from unwavering confidence in God. As the mind renews, your thoughts shift from I can't to God can. From I'm not enough to God is more than enough. From what if I fail to what if God moves. This shift creates the kind of courage that empowers you to step into rooms you once felt unqualified for, pursue dreams you once felt undeserving of, and take actions you once believed were impossible. Boldness is the natural fruit of renewed thinking, because a renewed mind is one that refuses to allow fear to dictate decisions. It sees challenges through the lens of faith rather than intimidation. It approaches opportunities with expectation rather than hesitation. It faces opposition with spiritual authority rather than insecurity. As the mind renews, courage rises, because courage is the child of spiritual clarity. You cannot be bold when your thoughts are clouded by fear, but you cannot be timid when your thoughts are aligned with God's truth. A renewed mind removes the barriers that once made you shrink, hide, or retreat, and replace them with the conviction that you were created to move forward, not backward. With purpose ignited and boldness awakened, breakthrough becomes inevitable. Breakthrough is not always an external shift. It often begins internally. Many breakthroughs are delayed not because God is withholding them, but because the mind is not yet prepared to receive them. When the mind is filled with doubt, fear, negativity, and comparison, even blessings can feel overwhelming. But when the mind is renewed, you are able to perceive opportunities that once seemed invisible and embrace possibilities that once seemed unreachable. Breakthrough begins when your thoughts stop resisting what God is trying to release into your life. A renewed mind recognizes opportunities where an old mind only saw obstacles. It sees growth where the old mind saw threat. It sees God's hand where the old mind saw uncertainty. This shift unlocks breakthrough because breakthrough requires cooperation. Your thoughts must agree with what God is doing. You cannot experience breakthrough while thinking in patterns that contradict the blessing. Renewing the mind prepares the internal environment for external change. It replaces the scarcity mindset with abundance thinking, the fear mindset with faith-filled expectation, the defeated mindset with victorious identity. Breakthrough also requires resilience. And resilience is strengthened by renewed thinking. When your mind is renewed, challenges do not discourage you as easily. Setbacks no longer send you spiraling. Delays no longer make you question your worth. Instead, you begin to interpret challenges through a new framework, a framework that sees trials as preparation, obstacles as opportunities for strengthening, and difficulties as invitations for God to show his power. A renewed mind is not shaken easily because it has learned to anchor itself not in emotions, but in truth. That inner stability creates an environment where breakthrough can manifest because your faith becomes consistent rather than conditional. Renewing the mind also breaks generational patterns. Many people unknowingly carry mindsets passed down through family, culture, or trauma, patterns of fear, patterns of scarcity, patterns of self-sabotage, patterns of insecurity. A renewed mind disrupts those patterns by introducing new beliefs that reshape your identity and your behavior. When your thinking changes, your habits change. When your habits change, your lifestyle changes. When your lifestyle changes, your outcomes change. Breakthrough happens when old cycles lose their power and new cycles of faith, obedience, courage, and growth begin to form. Another dimension of breakthrough unlocked by a renewed mind is the ability to hear God more clearly. A cluttered mind struggles to discern direction. A fear-driven mind struggles to interpret divine promptings, but a renewed mind becomes a place where God's voice is not competing with mental chaos. Clarity enhances discernment, and discernment enhances movement. Many delays in life come from hesitating because of unclear direction. As the mind renews, spiritual sensitivity deepens. You begin to sense when to wait, when to move, when to speak, when to be still. And that discernment positions you for breakthrough because you begin moving in alignment rather than uncertainty. Renewing the mind also restores emotional stability. Thoughts create emotions, and emotions create decisions. When thoughts are rooted in anxiety, insecurity, or negativity, emotions become volatile. But when thoughts are grounded in faith, peace, and truth, emotions stabilize. This stability unlocks breakthrough because emotional chaos often blocks progress. A renewed mind brings balance to the heart, clarity to the spirit, and strength to the soul, creating the internal aura necessary for external change. A renewed mind also unlocks creativity, innovation, and problem-solving keys that led to breakthrough in relationships, careers, ministry, and personal growth. When your mind is no longer limited by fear-based thinking, you begin to see solutions where you once saw dead ends. You begin to think outside the boundaries that once confined you. Creativity flows more easily because your thoughts are not trapped in cycles of doubt. Ideas come alive because your mind is no longer resisting possibilities. Breakthrough often appears in the form of new ideas, new strategies, or new perspectives, and a renewed mind is fertile ground for these things to flourish. Renewing the mind is also a form of spiritual warfare. Many battles are won or lost in the mind long before they manifest in life. Every lie that is believed becomes a limitation. Every fear that is entertained becomes a foothold. Every negative narrative rehearsed becomes a barrier. But every time the mind is renewed, spiritual ground is reclaimed. Every time an old lie is replaced with God's truth, a stronghold weakens. Every time fear is replaced with faith, spiritual authority increases. This internal victory unlocks external breakthrough because the enemy loses access to the mental spaces he once used to influence your decisions and discourage your spirit. With a renewed mind, relationships transform. You begin to communicate differently, forgive more easily, set healthy boundaries, love more deeply, and release resentment more freely. This unlocks breakthrough in your relational life because many relational struggles come from unhealed thoughts, unchallenged assumptions, and unresolved internal wounds. Renewing the mind brings healing to those inner places and enables relationships to grow from a healthier, more grounded foundation. A renewed mind also strengthens consistency. Breakthrough requires consistency, consistent faith, consistent decisions, consistent discipline, consistent obedience. But consistency becomes difficult when the mind is unstable, divided, or overwhelmed. Renewing the mind strengthens discipline because your thoughts become aligned with your goals rather than your fears. It becomes easier to stay committed when your thoughts support your purpose instead of sabotaging it. Consistency leads to breakthrough because progress accumulates, momentum builds, and patterns shift. Finally, renewing the mind unlocks the freedom to become everything God intended. It breaks the chains of internal limitation and allows you to walk with confidence, assignment, clarity, and authority. As the mind renews, your life begins to reflect a deeper level of transformation, a transformation that starts in thought, but expresses itself in action, character, relationships, and destiny. And as you rise from this moment, may your mind rise with you. May every thought that once held you hostage lose its authority. May every fear that once whispered defeat fall silent. You are stepping into a new mental atmosphere, one shaped by truth, strengthened by faith, and sustained by God's presence. You are not returning to the person you were before this word entered your spirit. You are returning renewed, realigned, and ready. Let every old pattern break, every old lie dissolve, every old limitation crumble. Let the power of a transformed mind become the foundation for everything you build from this day forward. You are entering a season where clarity replaces confusion, courage replaces hesitation, and purpose replaces wandering. This is not just inspiration, this is impartation. This is not just motivation, this is activation. Walk with your mind lifted. Walk with your spirit awakened. Walk with the confidence of someone whose thoughts are no longer dictated by fear, but directed by God. Your breakthrough is not coming, your breakthrough has begun.